Welcome and thank you for listening to La Piana Consulting's webinar on the state of summer 2020 and beyond. I'm Luis Vergara, partner with La Piana Consulting, and during this webinar, I will be speaking to three leaders from the youth development sector who specifically focus on outdoor education. As a nonprofit sector response to the COVID-19 crisis, leaders of youth organizations face a particularly difficult set of challenges. The questions we want to address today through this webinar include: what does the future look like for these kinds of services? Is there a particular timeline for return to normalcy? And what does normal even mean anymore? To discuss these issues, we have with us today the leaders of some of our nation's premier outdoor education organizations. Panel, thank you for joining us. I would like to start by having each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your organization. Phil, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Phil Kilbridge. I'm the president and CEO of NatureBridge. Thank you to La Piana and Associates for consulting for bringing this together. Luis, thanks for calling us together. Kim and Josh, it's a pleasure to work with both of you. Just as an aside, I'm an alum of Outward Bound, which is near and dear to Kim and Josh's hearts, and I'm a donor and a program participant in Youth Outside. So deep admiration for both of you. NatureBridge is the National Park Service's largest residential environmental learning partner. Typically, in any other year, we would serve 35,000 kids with deeply immersive, up to week-long experiences in their national parks. I can obviously share more about the deep impact of COVID-19 and this pandemic on our work shortly.
Hi, thank you so much, Luis, and to La Piana Consulting for having us. I think you'll see a lot of synergy here. I too am an alum of Outward Bound programming, and both NatureBridge and Outward Bound have been participants in Youth Outside's programs. And thank you to both Phil and Josh, who have been big supporters personally of Youth Outside. I am Kim Moore-Bailey, and I'm the CEO of Youth Outside. And my organization is committed to ensuring that more Black, Indigenous, and people of color throughout the U.S. have increased levels of engagement, participation, and leadership opportunities in the outdoor and environmental movement. We support these efforts through grant making, capacity building, and by delivering a suite of programs to both established and aspiring outdoor professionals that offer the skills necessary to transform the environmental field into a more equitable and culturally relevant sector.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Brankman. I am the Executive Director of Outward Bound USA. And as Phil and Kim mentioned, we're all friends here and know each other well. And professionally, all of us, I think, work in similar veins to advance missions connected to the outdoors in young people, and specifically young people of color and from poverty. Outward Bound is a federated organization, national organization that consists of Outward Bound USA and 11 regional schools located around the country that provide expeditionary learning programs to students in the backcountry, in city parks, and in classrooms. We use an expeditionary model to help students learn more about themselves and learn through challenge and discovery. Typically in a normal year, which we'll discuss in a moment, Outward Bound works with about 50,000 students a year across the country.
Great, thanks again to each of you. So, as I said in the beginning, what we really want to talk about is, where we're going as a sector, where the sector is going. And before we do that, I want to kind of just start by asking you a little bit about what happened to your individual organizations and maybe even the sector specifically. Maybe ask Kim a little bit more about the sector since she has a bigger kind of perspective, being the type of work that she does. But I want to ask you all, when the pandemic hit and shelter in place became the norm for most of us, what happened? What happened to your individual organizations in the sector even? Kim, can we start with you maybe with a bigger picture of what happened?
Well, I think, and definitely Josh and Phil can speak to this, if what happened with their organizations exemplifies what happened with the sector. Because of the timing as to when it hit, so many organizations in the, I'll say, outdoor environmental education space were engaged in school-based programs, either in school or after-school programs. And the timing of when the pandemic hit and sort of the shutdown of the schools really impacted so many programs in such an abrupt way. And it was sort of, with school ending, young people just being sent home, everybody was just sort of caught off guard. And there was also the sense of like, is this a week? Is this 2 weeks? Is this temporary? And so I think in addition to the adjusting to having to work from home, whatever that looked like, there was also this sense of, how long is this? Somebody, is this a short term? Is this a long term? This idea of like, this is a marathon versus a race. Okay, but then like what mile in the marathon are we actually in was also the next question. So I think that was probably the big question. And once it started to settle in that this was going to be a bit of a long haul, very quickly, the sector really had to come to grips with what this meant. And financially, I think was the next big question. For so many organizations, the spring is such a significant time for fundraising activities, conferences, the opportunity to do their a gala or whatever that happens to look like. This is a time to ramp up for summer day camp registrations. So the reality of any financial gains during this time that was going to get them through their second or third quarter was also now a real reality. And very quickly, folks had to start scrambling to take a look at their books to see what could they pivot. They also had to look at the programming that they were offering and what could they continue to offer. Could they, even if they could bring it to a different location based on all of the restrictions that were now being placed before us, how large could folks gather? Could they honor particular rules and regulations that were coming from their counties? If somebody on their staff happened to get sick, did they have the capacity to support what that might look like? So there really was just this sense of like, shut it down. And the inability to even begin to prepare really did hamper most operations, if not all, if you were doing direct program delivery. I know for Youth Outside, because we are not a direct program service in that way, we were pretty quickly able to shift to a work from home model. Our program that did start in April is working with entry to mid-level staff. So we were able to launch that program and we were just able to do it virtually. We were also in the middle of our grant making program when we were getting ready to launch our 2020 grantees. The communication we sent out was, your 2020 grants checks are coming. If anything, we just said, where are you? So we know whether you still want us to mail the check or not, or we are also happy to wire it. And what does that look like? And where would you like us to send the money? We were able to do some expediting around that process so that folks could get the check a little earlier. We traditionally give general operating checks, so we didn't have to do any of the shifting that some other funders were doing to release some restrictions. Our grants are general operating. And we were also very cognizant that with folks shifting to working from home, the abundance of use of parks. And so there was lots of communicating now around, what does it safely look like to go outside? And we were quick to join in some of those best practices for safe use of parks during the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Kim. And Josh and Phil, I think, one of the things that stands out about something that Kim said, both of your organizations, I assume, were ramping up for summer, which is a big time, for young people and for you all as organizations. Immediately, how did that, look for you all, in terms of, your day-to-day?
So, and Josh will have a different perspective because our program at NatureBridge, 95% of the students that we serve is actually during the school year because they come out with their classes, with their schools. So I'll talk specifically about that as we then morph into talking about the summer. I was in daily meetings about coronavirus starting in late February, which is sooner than most. We're located in Northern California. That's where our headquarters are, but we have campuses from Virginia to Washington down to California. So we were watching what was happening in Seattle, getting early indications of how significant this was going to be. To be very explicit, when we don't have students on trail, we don't have work. I mean, that is our mission, and our delivery is having students out on trail. I'll tell you about how we've pivoted, but our traditional model is you sleep in a dorm with your fellow classmates, you eat in a dining hall, you spend 9 hours out on trail each and every day, whether it be in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area or Yosemite National Park. We, on March 20th, announced to our full staff after 2 meetings in advance of that we were laying off or furloughing 70% of our staff. That's 170 team members who care passionately about delivery of our mission. Every other person received either pay cuts or a loss in hours. I mean, from our financial model, which is primarily earned revenue, just through July 1, we are missing $5.2 million in earned revenue that we have to solve around because we just don't have reserves in that total. So part of it is how do you bring in new revenue, and how do you save on expenses? Because the very survivability of NatureBridge and our mission depends on us making really brutal decisions in this unknown period of time. So that's how it worked for us. We have pivoted to some level of remote programming. We're trying to think through what our summer looks like and when we could get back to residential environmental learning, that I'm sure will come up in future questions.
At Outward Bound, as Phil alluded to, our program season, typically summer is our largest program season. We have more students in the field at one time than any of the other seasons. But it does vary across the Outward Bound network. So like Phil, we were monitoring this with our safety and risk management teams fairly early on. And when shelter in places started to roll out nationally, that really did spell the end of most, if not all of our in-person programming across the country. Spring is a busy season, especially those programs, Outward Bound programs that work directly with school districts. So New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and San Francisco were particularly hit hard, and they immediately paused programs during that sort of early period where, as we've all spoken to, really you just didn't know if it was going to be a week or a month. As we started to shift our sights to the summer, as I mentioned, the summer season for Outward Bound is fairly large and is a majority of our earned revenue across the Outward Bound system. And we took a tiered approach. So we started assessing whether or not our programs could be operated in some way and what that would look like. And because of our national model, it meant a national focus as well as regional focuses at each Outward Bound program. We made the decision in mid-May to cancel all wilderness programming for the summer through the end of August. And that it was a significant and will be a significant hit for the system. We've received, I would say, both internally and externally from Outward Bound, a fair bit of sort of appreciation and praise for that tough decision. The revenue model is going to be challenged, as Phil alluded to. We will see probably a loss of upwards of $10 to $12 million in revenue this summer as a result of that system-wide. And at the same time, I think most everyone has understood that we are under, extraordinary circumstances, and people appreciated that we made the decision. We will likely run some programming where it's appropriate. And so I think that's part of the understanding of how Outward Bound operates is, while in the summer, most of our programming are those wilderness courses in the backcountry. Some of our Outward Bound schools that operate in cities and closer with school districts do have smaller, shorter, and virtual programming already in existence. And so some of those programs will continue to operate, and there's some good work happening there. The last thing I would say is the decision was really hard, but what I would frame it to is we did come up with models under which we thought we could likely run programming this summer in the backcountry, abiding by federal and local regulations, social distancing, testing, et cetera. what it really came down to was, frankly, I think, an ethical decision, similar to the way I would equate it is to the idea of wearing masks and when people are outdoors right now, which is that we started to make a decision that if we had courses in the field and they started to stack up with potential COVID cases, what was our responsibility to the communities and our staff during that period of time? And that was where we made the decision that both in terms of rural healthcare systems, as well as the health and well-being of our staff and students, that we just didn't feel as though the right decision was to march forward with courses at scale. And so that's what really drove our decision in May for the summer.
One of the things I'd like to, kind of just go, and maybe Josh, if you can, just because I know that summer represents such an important time for you all, maybe we can start with you talking a little bit about, so you talked a little bit about what it looks like. Maybe we could talk about both the immediate future, but what does it look like for your organizations? What does it look like for the sector? Not just now, but kind of moving forward as well. What's your thoughts about that?
So I'll jump in, and I think that, we are certainly in that mode right now. I mean, part of the maybe positive unintended consequence of canceling a summer season is those staff that you do have around have some time to think innovatively about what's next. And so we are in that phase right now at Outward Bound across the country. I think it's falling into a couple camps. Number one, as Phil mentioned, everyone's thinking about how to deliver mission through virtual programming. And, we recognize that, Outward Bound is built on, close communication and team dynamics. And so you simply can't take that virtual entirely. But there are some of our core values that we think we can deliver in some ways virtually. And so we're testing some of that. So that's sort of one. Number two is, it really will depend on what happens with local jurisdictions and specifically school districts. So what we're starting to see is, frankly, some interest in school districts who may have their own limited resumption plans of their own, trying to figure out what to do with young people when they're not in school potentially in the fall. And so we actually are in conversation with some school districts about, depending on where the regulations and testing goes, is that actually an opportunity for the youth development space like Outward Bound? And third, we are looking at least as it connects to the part of the Outward Bound program model, that longer courses, meaning say 20 days and longer, could actually see an uptick in interest, in part because once you are able to get a group of people isolated, then they are an isolated, intact group. And so is there an opportunity for gap year programming for sort of young adults where they actually would feel comfortable heading into the backcountry for 30, 45, 60 days or longer, which just isn't possible right now in, say, a 5 or 7 day course, because that whole time period, you're sort of wondering whether or not anyone has COVID and what do you do in that. But once you get past that sort of initial 7 to 10 day hurdle, there is an opportunity to operate like an intact. Actually, are looking at those programs as all programs. We've always run programs like that, but we wonder whether there will be an interest, especially from perhaps college students who aren't returning to campuses in the same way.
We do operate some summer programs. Like Josh, most of our multi-day backpacking courses have been canceled, in addition to what Josh said, because a lot of students travel. They fly internationally for those programs, and it just seems like there's not that appetite to not much less move within counties, but move within states. So in part, it's customer driven as well as it is from sort of an ethical and risk management perspective. We plan to do small testing of non-residential day camps at one of our campuses with local CDC and public health guidelines. What seems to be the model is not just a 1 week program, but needing it to be a 3 or 4 week program at a time, keeping kids within a pod no larger than 12. For us, it would be 6 to 1 with an educator and then one other mirrored 6-person group so that you could have backup. Kids, instead of providing food, kids have to bring their own lunch. Instead of busing kids, which we would traditionally do, they have to get there on their own in their own intact group. It's taking temperatures when they get out of the car. It's filling out a survey. It's all the work from a risk management perspective that we're doing with our own educators in terms of the hand washing, the sanitation, the sanitization, is that a word? A variety of things that we need to do to up our game in terms of risk management, which is already, like Outward Bound's, among the best in the field. What we believe we know, that sounds wrong. It's a qualifier. I am seeing very little evidence of transmission of this virus in the outdoors. That it is happening indoors, in enclosed spaces. So if you are layering 99% of the time, except for when you use the facilities, with being outdoors in small groups, wearing masks, cleaning your hands, doing all those things you need to do, then you can get to the upside mental and physical health benefits that our youth so desperately need right now. I mean, that's the thing that we haven't even really touched on right now is there ever been a time more than ever where kids need to feel safe and active for their own social and emotional learning, for their own character development, for their own physical development than right now? And so we're going to need to get really creative on that. And, you know, I'm optimistic about what we're doing in a small trial case, but it's limited. Kids are on their phones and on their screens and on their tablets and on their Zoom way too often. And this is going to be their summer camp. And that's just atrocious to think about, given the context of the world in which we are living right now, which is just diabolically and maniacally depressing and angry and sad.
Picking up where Phil left off, you know, as we have transitioned our workshops and our work with our grantees, where we're recognizing in how COVID-19 has really disproportionately impacted communities of color, and recognizing and supporting our grantees as they've started to pivot. And we're also really pushing them and asking them, as they've had to make these pivots, what are the impacts to communities of color and to their stakeholders or their partners of color? Have they had to cut certain services that are further alienating perhaps those very communities or those very participants in ways that we understand, but is this part of their framing, and is this part of their decision making, and are there other decisions that they can perhaps factor into to help not, as Phil was just saying, keep those very benefits from exactly the young people that we know even more so need these opportunities to connect. One example, we have a grantee, Pie Ranch, who's down on the coast here in California. They usually do school-based programming, and in the summer they work with young people and bring it out to their farm, and they had to stop their educational program in accordance with their county guidelines, but they have a farm stand that they were able to keep open, and they pivoted with their farm stand to be able to serve as a food distribution center to get food delivery to insecure folks across the Bay Area. So again, because our funding is general operating, there was no reason for them to stop doing that work, and it's still very much self-central to who they are. So we are continuing, like I said, to do our work mostly virtual, and we're being able to support our grantees in that way. We also offer our grantees quarterly, we meet with them, so we've been able to do that, or we will start that virtually. But we've also included some additional office hours just to allow for that one-on-one check-in, because sometimes what's happening in a group setting doesn't allow for those individual conversations that we also recognize are really important. And we are hoping in the fall to facilitate sort of a program that we also run, our Outdoor Educators Institute, and really thinking about this idea of trauma and the outdoors. And how can we facilitate this program to give the young people, 18 to 24-year-olds who enroll in this program, the chance to really think about the health and wellness benefits of being outdoors, and how everyone coming through this time are also going to need to understand what that connection looks like. And ideally, our training program can offer them that lens to think about how to incorporate those benefits in their training program. So hopefully we'll be able to facilitate that in the safe pods and honoring social distancing, which might not be something that's going to go away as quickly as we all hope.
Yeah, just a quick point, Kim, is like we've been steeped in this language of adverse child experiences, and regardless of how many you have had, every child is experiencing this as an adverse childhood experience,
Right.
layered on top of this series of others. So just underscoring your point, Kim. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to jump in as well, and I think, Kim, I really appreciate you raising those issues, and the idea of office hours that you mentioned, and you and I actually spoke about it earlier. I think one of the unintended, again, positive consequences of the COVID circumstance and era is that it is forcing conversation, certainly within Outward Bound, with more urgency around how are we being as respondent as we can be for the communities in which we work. And Arthur Pearson, who runs the Outward Bound program in Boston, and it looks similar in some design to the programs that Phil's team operates. They partner with the Boston Public Schools, and we're hearing from school systems that they've lost track of 20, 30, 40% of their students. The school systems just don't even know where those kids are because they're not showing up every day. And so that is forcing that staff to really, I think creatively and hopefully, I think compassionately with, okay, so how can we actually be part of supporting the Boston Public School system in A, making contact with these kids, but B, who cares about, delivering a 7 or 10 or 14-day Outward Bound experience right now, but can we find some way to make contact with these young people that Outward Bound does have relationships with and support the sort of whole child youth development, K-12 and nonprofit youth development space effort to make sure that these young people are getting some type of connection and interaction, and whether it's food insecurity or just sort of social emotional learning and sort of the trauma of the current experience. Anyway, I think this is pushing us as an organization at Outward Bound to, I think, to engage more deeply in that work. And that's not to say it wasn't top of mind, but I think the urgency is pushing us in ways that I actually think are beneficial to us as an organization in terms of really making sure we're as responsive as we can be to our students.
I want to thank you all for lifting that. As I was preparing to do this interview with you all in the panel discussion, what raised the biggest question for me is what's going to happen to this young generation of young people who are all going through a trauma together, and who are going to have to, we're going to need to figure out as a sector how to help them become resilient and wade through all of this. So